Without any further ado, I would like to call upon Rabbi Greenberg, the Chabad rabbi in Stanford University, one of the rabbis on AskMoses.com, to discuss with us what is the Jewish key for a successful relationship. Rabbi Greenberg, please.
Shavua Tov. We'll try that again. Shavua Tov. The guy should be in a better mood. This is called a warm Edmonton night. So there was a college student who had a problem, a crisis. Whenever he began to love a young woman he was dating, and then he would bring this young woman home to introduce her to his parents, the moment she left, the mother would recite a whole list of deficiencies in this girl. She's not for you. Character assassination. It was a long list. And this didn't happen once. Every girl he dated and brought home, the mother was not thrilled. So he went to his professor in psychology. He says, "Professor, you got to help me out here with my mother. What techniques could I employ?" So the professor says, it's actually very simple. Find a girl that's very similar to your mother. Bring her home and see what the result will be. So he's canvassing the campus one evening. He sees a party, and he sees a girl that's strikingly similar to his mother. She looks like identical. He goes in, he begins to schmooze with her, and they converse, they strike up a friendship. It goes on for a few weeks, a few months. Beautiful, in love, just beautiful. Finally, the day comes, he brings the girl home. Fine. The next weekend he's on campus, the professor sees him, he says, "Knew how to go." So he says, "My mother loved her, but my father couldn't stand her." So relationships are complicated. Relationships are complicated. All relationships. Relationships with siblings, family relationships. All relationships are complicated. Relationships are difficult. Marriage, it's very difficult. Relationships are challenging. One of Socrates, the great philosopher, one of his students was very involved with philosophy, and so he went over to Socrates. He says, "Should I marry? Because if I marry, maybe I won't be able to dedicate myself to the studies." So Socrates says, "You should definitely get married." He says, "If you find a lovely woman and she's a good wife for you, she'll enrich your life, you'll be happier. And if not, it doesn't work out, you won't lose, because then you'll become a philosopher." So today we have a lot of philosophers, right? There's a difficulty. Or it's a husband and wife sitting on a couch. A tornado comes, sweeps the couch right out of the living room, and they're flying up in the air. It's very dangerous. The woman gets all emotional. She's starting to cry, but she's emotional. And the husband says, this is not a time to get all emotional here. We're flying in the air. We need to figure out how to land safely and how to make a landing, and you're busy getting all emotional. What's going on? She says, you don't understand. This is the first time we've been out together in 20 years. So a little bit about relationships. Some ideas from Judaism. We'll begin with a very beautiful idea that actually comes from the Kabbalah, from mystical Jewish thought. It's in the Talmud as well, but it's developed beautifully in the Kabbalah. In Judaism, we know that God creates the world, and the question is brought up in different texts of our tradition. Why did God create the world? And the answer is because God is loving. Ki chafetz chesed hu. The world was created because God wanted to express love, to create a relationship with humanity in a loving way. It should be meaningful and they'll have free choice. But the world was created because God wanted to have a loving and meaningful relationship with human beings. Kind of like a loving parent or parents that bring a child into the world in love, out of love, for love. So God creates the world. And that's how the Torah opens. The Hebrew Bible opens with that majestic opening. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Okay, simple verse. Normally, what's the question? In secular books, works of philosophy, or people ask, how do you know God exists? That's a normal question. How do you know God created the world? The verse in the Torah says God created the world, but how do you know that? In the Kabbalah, in the Zohar, on the first verse, it asks the exact opposite question. Not how do we know God exists, but how does the world exist? It's a different question. Why? Because they ask, it's a bit of a metaphysical question. If God is infinite, filling all place, everywhere, how is there a world for a finite world? Doesn't infinite God crowd out space for a finite world? If the world exists, then God doesn't exist in that space, which means God is limited. It's a Kabbalistic question. I mean, for example, say you have a book, right? You open up any book. So it has 200 pages. And I say, how long would it take you to turn through all the pages? So it'll take a few minutes. If the book would have an infinite amount of pages, the book would be infinite, how long would it take you to flip through all the pages? How long? Huh? Forever? Everybody agrees with the answer, forever? Anybody objects to it? Huh? It won't open. Have to get the tape for that. If you have a book that has its infinite amount of pages, how long will it take to turn through all its pages? So most people are saying the normal answer would be it would take forever. But if you think about it, that's not correct. If the book is truly infinite, then you don't exist. If the book takes up all space, it's endless, then how is there space for you? The moment you say there's a person turning pages, the book is finite, it has parameters, it's not infinite. It doesn't take up all space. Something's infinite, there's no space for anything else. So that's the question that Kabbalah asks. How do we exist if God exists? It's kind of like they tell in the former Soviet Union. The teacher was indoctrinating the class that God doesn't exist. So this teacher goes to the window and says, students, do you see the trees outside? And the students say, yes. She says, that's because the trees exist. Do you see the sky? The children say, yes. She says, because the sky exists, it's real. Do you see God? And the student said, no. So she's that's because God does not exist. So a Jewish student from the back of the class gets up. He says, do you see the teacher's arms? And everybody says, yes. The student says, that's because she has them. They exist. Do you see her legs? Everybody says, yes. He says, that's because they exist. She has them. Do you see her brains? And everybody says, no. The student says, that's because she doesn't have any. So you could live a life that what exists is what I could see. what's tangible, what I could grasp with my senses. But if I can't grasp it with my senses, it's not real, it doesn't exist. Now, if you think about it, the most meaningful things in life actually don't lend themselves to the senses in a physical way. Chocolate cake, you could touch. Could you touch love? Nachas, happiness, meaning, holiness? The deeper the thing is, actually, the less you could touch it. Often, if you can't touch something or see it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means it's deeper. It's more real. It's more relevant. It's deeper. But in any event, the Kabbalah, kind of through the eyes of that child, God is real and exists. And so the question is, how does the world exist? God's infinite. You're with me with the question? That was the most complex piece here. Yes? Okay. What's the answer? The answer is in Hebrew in one word, but there were many books written about it in Jewish history. One word. Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum. It's a long concept, but the short of it is that Arizal, Isaac Luria, and then developed by the mystics after, have a simple and brilliant solution. And they say when God desired to create the world, because God is infinite, what God did is God created a tzimtzum, a contraction. God created a spherical vacuum, so to speak. God said, I will remove my infinite presence to the side a little bit, to create space for genuine otherness. Tzimtzum. Siluk es atzmi litzad. God said, I'm going to withdraw, take some of my presence and move it to the side, create a spherical vacuum, anthropomorphically speaking. And in that space where God's presence or reality is not felt or sensed, that's the beginning of the spiritual evolution. That's where Bereshit bara Elokim, then the world could be created in this empty space. It's called Tzimtzum. So the mystics say, God created the world in love. If you want to learn how to love and have a relationship, copy what God did. That's a key to love. According to the Kabbalah, what is the key to love? Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum. Create in your heart, in your mind, in your time, space for genuine otherness. Could one create in their heart space for somebody else who's not them, who's very different than them, and love them as they are? That takes effort. That takes tzimtzum. You have to make space in your heart for somebody who's different. It's easy to love somebody who you don't have to make space for. But to make space for somebody else as they are, that's tzimtzum. There was a fellow, he went out, he was dating. So he picks up the young woman, and for about 6 hours, he's talking about himself straight, nonstop. His achievements, accomplishments, his qualities, his virtues, barely breathed. 6 hours straight. Finally, he realizes, it's like 3 a.m, he realizes he's talking about himself for 6 hours straight. He stops and he says, okay, enough of me talking about myself. Let's talk about you a little bit. So tell me, what do you think of me? What was his problem? He was tzimtzum challenged. In California, you would say tzimtzum. He was full of himself. He had no space for otherness. Even the space for otherness was about himself. He was full of himself. That means he lacked tzimtzum. He lacked the capacity to create space for otherness. So if one could create space for otherness in a genuine way, there you have real love. A child, when we come into the world naturally, a child is very selfish. A child is not people. See, a child is not evil or bad, but a child is not virtuous or a saint either. A baby. People think, oh, so a baby is innocent. But in a way, a child is the quintessential of selfishness. Did a child ever say, oh, my mom is really tired now, maybe I should cry, wait till 6 a.m.? It never happened once. When did a child ever think that way? A child wakes up 2 in the morning after you didn't sleep for 2 days because they were sick or whatever it is, and a child basically cries. And this is, if you can put words into a child's mouth, the baby is basically saying this: if you don't pick me up immediately, give me food, hold me, sing to me, kiss me, and take care of me, I will ruin your life. and then they get a response. A child is the quintessence. A child only knows, even in the fields of psychiatry, they'll tell you a child can't even distinguish itself from the rest of the world. It sees the whole world as an extension of itself. A child sees the whole world as part of itself. It takes time till they could tell the difference. Part of maturing and growing up is the whole world doesn't revolve around me. I need to think about other people. I need to create Tzimtzum in myself. So as somebody who can't create space for otherness is full of themselves, selfish. You have actually a good symbol of this in English words. If you want a symbol of the spiritual and the physical, one word that will symbolize the spiritual reality and a word for the physical reality. 2 English words, excellent symbols. One would be for the spiritual reality, soul. The word neshama, soul. Spiritual. The physical reality, soil. Earth, soil. What's the difference in the spelling between soul and soil? The I and the U. If I think about I, that's a material, physical way of thinking. Not Tzimtzum, it's about I, it's about me. The moment I start to think about you, that's already soul, that's spiritual. It's about otherness. So naturally a person gravitates at soil, it's earthly. To be transcendent, to love is about tapping into soul, it's about creating space in your heart for otherness. There was a CEO of a company. Wealthy, very successful, powerful business person. He has a mysterious illness, he's not feeling well. They go to the best doctors in Manhattan, special surgeons and specialists. My wife drives him to the appointment. Ex-specialist in this field checks, there's a thorough exam, and says, okay, I need to speak to the wife for a few minutes. The husband could leave the room. Okay. Tells the wife, look, I'll tell you what it is. I've seen a lot of this stuff. This is all, it comes from the stress of business. He runs a major business, a lot of decisions, and all of the pressures and anxiety he carries alone. He doesn't share them at home or with other people. He pretends it's all, but it's too much for a human being to carry. And so what you need to do is, in the home environment, if you can treat him like absolute royalty and a king for, let's say, a half a year to a year, to alleviate every kind of extra stress, he'll recover his health because it will balance out and he'll be back to flourishing health. So he says, I'll give you some advice in the morning when he wakes up. The first thing, give him 2 or 3 compliments right off the bat. Big praises. If he wants breakfast or something, right away, have it catered, everything. When he comes home, don't tell him about any problems in the house. Everything's beautiful. Tell him how wonderful it is to have him in the home, and a hot, big dinner should be catered right away. Not health food, the yogurt or crackers that women sometimes consider a meal. A real big piece of steak with Canadian barbecue sauce or whatever it is. The real thing, healthy food. And you have to, more compliments. He gives him a whole list of things she should do in the home, and this will allow him to get restored to flourishing health. They travel, and she says, okay, thank you. They're back in the car, they're driving back from Manhattan, it's quiet in the car. So the husband turns to the wife and says, you were in the room for like 10 minutes with the specialist, what did he say? So she thinks for a moment, and she says, the doctor said you're going to pass away. So, to make tzimtzum in one's heart, to make space for somebody else, it doesn't mean you have to stop existing, right? There's a certain point where there might be an issue. But by and large, very often the challenge comes, is are we able to make a healthy tzimtzum in our heart, to create a healthy space for somebody else? Now this idea is expressed very beautifully in a tradition that a lot of you will be familiar with. At a Jewish wedding, there's something called a badekenish. when the groom veils the bride shortly before the chuppah, shortly before the actual wedding ceremony. So often you'll see at a traditional wedding, the bride is there and she has this veil that's covering her. Where does this tradition come from? Jews have been doing this for a very long time. What's the origin? If you look into the Jewish text, it will tell you that Jacob, our founding father, Jacob, Yaakov, fell in love with Rachel, with Rachel. He wanted to marry her. He goes to his future father-in-law and says, I want to marry Rachel, I love her. So he says, okay, very nice, that's beautiful. Work for me for 7 years. You work for 7 years, you can marry her. I give you my blessing. Okay. He works for 7 years. What happens the night of the wedding? The Bible tells us that she had a sister that was very similar, Leah. Some traditions say she was even a twin that was very similar, identical voice. But be that as it may, the father-in-law switched Rachel for Leah, and since the bride was veiled during the ceremony or whatever that environment was, he ends up marrying the wrong sister and discovered the deception only after it was too late. So he married the wrong woman. So if that would happen to somebody today, they'll be in therapy for a decade probably, at least, right? Right, he married the wrong woman. It was a bait and switch. So he goes to his father-in-law, what did you do? And he, of course, has a whole moral tale about what he did was just. But the end is, as the Bible tells us, Jacob ends up marrying Rachel a week later, the woman that he fell in love with, and he works an additional 7 years. So he marries her a week later, and So to commemorate this episode, the tradition is that there's the veiling of the bride. Jacob, there was a veil, a deception. But the question is, this is not a reason to veil the bride. This is a reason, if anything, to have an unveiling ceremony, maybe. To make sure you're marrying the right person. If you want to commemorate it, learn from your mistakes, right? Let's perpetuate the same thing for a few thousand years. Why not, right? I mean, it's a bizarre custom. What's the significance of it? So like all Jewish practices, there's a deep, beautiful lesson here in teaching and meditation about love. It gets to the heart of love. We're about to begin marriage. It's a meditation of love. A powerful message in the story. Rachel and Leah are not merely two historical figures, founding mothers of the Jewish people. They represent part of our personality. We each have an inner Rachel and an inner Leah. The person we fall in love with, or our spouse, has an inner Rachel and a Leah. What does that mean? Rachel represents, you go out, you fall in love with Rachel. The charming, charismatic, beautiful, humorous qualities in the person you date. Wow, beautiful, excellent, you're in love, it's absolutely incredible. Rachel, the person who you choose. Everything's beautiful, gorgeous. Bayahava, you fall in love. So people get married, they fall in love, it's beautiful. What happens is, and maybe there's some people that are not married and you think I'm a bit cynical now, so ask anybody with a marriage license if what I say is true. Every marriage, there comes a day, even the best of marriages, there comes a day where let's say the woman wakes up and she says, who is this roommate I married? I thought I was marrying a Rachel, I ended up with a Leah. Leah symbolizes, like in the Bible, the one who was more insecure, the one who had challenges. She was not Rachel. She didn't have the beauty of Rachel, and she had a lot of challenges. The Bible depicts the challenging life and the insecurity, and she was brought to tears a lot. So Leah represents the surprises in our spouse that we didn't know we were having a relationship with. We didn't know about necessarily. The shtick that we suddenly erupted later on. So I married somebody. Who you married? I'm in love. Wonderful. A few years. I thought I was married. There was something went on here. Something. I thought I was marrying Rachel. I ended up with Leah. What happened? So the groom is veiling the bride. What's the message? The message is, I choose to embrace and cherish and love and respect not only what is charming and beautiful to me, My love is a selfless love. And because it's a selfless love, I choose to embrace, and I'm dedicating myself in this marriage to embrace the totality of who you are. Even the Leah elements in you. There's part of your personality that will always be veiled. There are idiosyncrasies and mishagas that I will never understand. Guess what? They always could remain that way, and I'm going to love you anyway. I might not know them now. The Leah element is going to emerge later. But it's a selfless love that I choose to love and respect and cherish selflessly. The groom says that to the bride and the bride to the groom. There are different symbolisms. It goes both ways. But if the marriage is based on what I gain, what appeals to me, and its love is conditional, then by definition, when the conditions change, the love falters and fades. But if the love is based on something deep and transcendent, selfless part of my soul, a depth of beyond my ego, then it's a spiritual thing. It's a much deeper love. It's real romantic. It's very deep. Where's the deeper love come from? If you can learn to love the Leah elements of your spouse. To love the Rachel elements of your spouse doesn't really even mean you love your spouse necessarily. It means you love yourself. Because that's God agreeing. Maybe it's God saying enough said. In the meantime, you could fight with your husband or wife. Hi, that was fantastic, wasn't it? Yeah. I once heard a cynical rabbi of a very big synagogue give an insight, a novel interpretation. He said, why is it when God gave the Torah, there was thunder and lightning, fire alarms, why? You know what his answer was? He said, God knew Jewish people, when they hear words of Torah, they fall asleep. So there was kailis, ubrakim, and alarms this way. So the Kotzker Rebbe says like this. He says, he was walking through the dining hall of the yeshiva or something, and he sees a student. He sees a student eating a nice piece of salmon, digging into this piece of fish with relish. He says, what are you doing? What on earth are you doing? So the student says, what do you mean, what am I doing? I'm eating fish. I'm eating salmon. He says, why? He says, what do you mean why? Because I love it. I love salmon, so I'm eating it. He says, really? You love salmon? He says, yeah. He says, okay. So that's why you had somebody go to the sea, pull it out of its habitat, take it away from its family, brought it into the kitchen, you boiled it, you chopped its head off, and now you're eating it because you love it. You don't love salmon, you love yourself. You love the way salmon tastes, so you killed it, you butchered it, you cooked it, because you love yourself. You don't love salmon at all. So that's called fishy love. Sometimes love is a bit fishy. I love. What do you love? Do you love yourself? If you love somebody who brings excitement or pleasure or entertainment to your life, you love them. You love yourself. And because they enhance your life, you love them. So you love yourself, so you love them. And when they stop bringing those things to your life, it's conditional love. But if I say I can love a person, it's not selfish. It comes from selflessness. You could say from the godly element. That's deeper love. That's not about ego. It's about deeper soul stuff. So, Jacob marries Rachel and Leah. But who do most of the tribes of Israel come from? Who is Jacob buried with for these thousands of years in the final resting place? With Leah. Almost every Jew alive today comes from Jacob and Leah. Yehuda comes from Leah. Most of the Jews come from the tribe of Yehuda. But most of the tribes come from Leah. Jacob's interned with Leah. Spiritually, what does it signify? that when you can learn to love and create a relationship with the part of your spouse that's challenging to your ego, the love that emerges is deeper than the love that comes natural. Why? Because the love that comes natural is not deep love. It's coming from the ego. It's coming from your superficial self. It's not bad. It's not terribly deep. But if I can love somebody and it's not about my ego, it's coming from a much deeper part within me. That love is powerful love. It's easy to fall in love. Fall in love is very easy. To sustain love, that's the challenge. That comes from a deeper part. There's Somerset Maugham wrote a story, an interesting story. The story was about a woman, a wife, who wrote a book of poetry, and it was the poetry described an affair that a woman had, with vivid images. All of London is talking about this book. It became a bestseller. And there's a big party to celebrate her literary success, her first book, and everybody's reading it. Everybody's in London is talking about it. And the husband, who wasn't a party person, gets slept along to the party. It's a party for his wife, and she's now a celebrated writer. He's at the party, hopping around. He hears two columnists, famous columnists, chatting about the book. One tells the other, he says, I've been writing for 45 years. I read this book of poetry about the affair. I tell you, I know writing, this only could have been written out of personal experience. There's no way somebody could write this out of thin air. This is first-hand experience. The husband's listening. He's like, "Oi, Gewalt." He rushes over to the wife. He says, "Tell me, is this out of personal experience? I heard this and this." She says, "Don't press the issue. Fregnish, don't ask." He says, "I demand, tell me right now." Ooh. She says, "If you must know, it came out of personal experience." He says, "Do I know the person?" She says, "Please don't ask." He says, "What do you mean don't ask? Tell me now, do I know the person?" She says, "You do. You know them." "Who is it?" He thunders. "Just don't ask. Tell me now." She says, "Who is it?" "It's you." He says, "What do you mean it's you?" "It's me," he says. I read the end of the book. The end of the book, the guy dies. "What do you mean it's me?" She says, "The person that loved me when we first got married died." In other words, what's the idea? First love, don't get depressed, it's not a Jewish story. It comes from lack of tzimtzum. The guy was tzimtzum. To fall in love is easy. Why? You don't have to make tzimtzum to fall in love. You know, it's not continual love. That takes effort, that takes soul, that takes creating space in your heart for genuine otherness. So that takes work. That's the symbolism of the chuppah, of the veiling of the bride. It reflects the notion of tzimtzum in the Kabbalah, powerful stuff. And it helps these ideas. I mean, another symbol, the famous, how does the Jewish wedding end? The groom breaks the glass. And everybody shouts what? Why do we shout Mazel Tov? What does the glass symbolize? What's the tradition? Destruction of the temple. To remember, to remember, even at the height of our joy, redemption is not yet in the world. Other people suffer. Even when things are going well for me, I need to be sensitive to the broken hearts in the world, to redemption that has not yet come to all of Israel. I need to remember the destruction, even it's a moral lesson, a spiritual lesson. Okay, but why does everybody shout Mazel Tov? What's the Mazel Tov about that? Shattering of the glass. Everybody breaks out Mazel Tov. Why? Huh? So some people say it's the last time the husband puts his foot down and these kinds of things. But the idea is you're marrying somebody. Right now, the groom and bride are both under the impression that they're marrying an exclusively Rachel. Everything's perfect, flawless. Your husband's going to break a couple things. Your wife is things are going to fall and break and shatter. In this human world, things are going to break and shatter. All the time. Learn to say Mazel Tov. Learn to celebrate. When small things break in life, don't get so upset. It's not supposed to be perfect. Learn to celebrate. If you can learn to celebrate and say Mazel Tov when small little things happen, you won't break the big things. The marriage will last. The love will last. Create a space in your heart for the otherness, for the imperfections of the otherness. Learn to say Mazel Tov. Often we get it wrong. We think, I don't feel love, so I'm not going to do. Do more and you'll feel more. It's an interesting, there's a lot more to be said about it, but it's a very interesting notion that sometimes doing the acts changes who we are and creates a whole deeper love. There's a story called, I think it's called The Happy Hypocrite. Actually, a Jewish author wrote it, but the story was there was this guy, his name was Lord George, and he was a despicable person, mean, cruel, selfish, and his face reflected his characteristics. He looked like a vicious person. One day he's walking somewhere and he sees this woman striking, looks exactly the woman of his dreams, and he tries to impress her and so forth. And she already heard about him. This guy had a reputation. He was wealthy, but he had a reputation, and she absolutely would have none of it. And she recognized that his face actually expresses who he is. So he realized that he's not going to be able to get this woman. So what does he do? He hires the best mask maker in London to make a mask that makes him look beautiful and handsome. The disguise, he looks kind and beautiful. A year or two later, he meets the same girl. He takes her out on a date and he charms her, and he's very charming and all of that. And she falls in love with him. She has no idea who it really is. It's Lord George under the mask. The mask is a masterpiece. You cannot tell. He gets married to her, but he pretends to be a kind person. He has to now pretend to be very kind and nice and sweet and caring and loving. Big Tzimtzum, right? He's doing acts of love, and he himself is cruel, but now he's putting on a show. He's acting. And everything's beautiful. They have a great marriage. 3 years down the road, he's walking on the street with his wife, a nice romantic stroll. His old classmates right away looks at him and in 2 seconds realizes this is George, this is a mask, it's a charade. Runs over to him and pulls, it's at the end of the story, the book at the end, pulls off the mask to disclose the faker that he is. And that's where you suspect the story is going to end. It's at the last page. And then the last lines are, and underneath the mask, his face became like the mask. His face changed. We become what we do. Our actions change who we are. When we pretend to be, even if you pretend to act nice. The Talmud says, act even if it's not sincere. Because underneath the mask of insincerity, our heart and our mind and our characteristics will change to reflect the beautiful deeds that we do. The Talmud really says the same thing in one line. You're not act loving, act sweet, even if you're not necessarily in the mood, because you'll become that. So Judaism emphasizes so often the action, both in mitzvot and in relationships, that creates a loving heart. It changes who we are. And it makes one feel love in a more powerful way. So that's that notion. You have that notion. And you have another powerful mitzvah, the mitzvah of, there are many mitzvot that enhance marriage very powerfully. I'll speak about maybe one or two now. One is what is known in the Torah as Mikvah, family purity. Powerful revolution in terms of how it enhances, the capacity it has to enhance relationships, romance, sexual attraction. Generally speaking, first, the general notion of mikvah is, in terms of marriage, because mikvah you find in the Torah often, the high priest. In biblical times, whenever a Jew or a Jewish person would endeavor to move from one level to a higher spiritual level, they would go to the mikvah. So for example, on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol, as he would move to a more greater sanctity, would go to the mikvah several times. We'll read in the prayers of Yom Kippur, the high priest went into the mikvah again. Any Jew, man or woman, if they wanted to go to the temple, would immerse in pure water first into the mikvah, spiritual purity. The mikvah brings spiritual purity. Now the mikvah is, again, a long discussion. I'm sure there's a JLI class about it, or you could ask the local rabbi in Rebbetzin, they'll be happy to teach you about the mikvah, but mikvah plays a large role in Judaism generally, both for men and women, especially when there was sacred space in the temple and so forth. So mikvah is an interesting topic, a vast topic, but then there's a special role for mikvah in relationships. Briefly, because it's a larger discussion in terms of how it's implemented in the laws, but I'm going to give just a quick overview of it. In marriage, what's mikvah? Mikvah is that during a woman's period, the monthly period, and for a week after, Jewish law says no physical sexual contact whatsoever. No physical contact. Relationship and love is expressed in words, in actions, but not physical contact. After that week, the woman immerses in a mikvah, and that brings new spiritual heights. She has a special mitzvah for that. It brings renewal. And then physical intimacy could resume for about 2 weeks, sometimes a bit more, a bit less, it depends. That's like a biblical law. And in Jewish life, that mitzvah has been so sacred and guarded to such interesting, you could say, Jewish extremes. That, for instance, I'll give you one for instance. Jewish law, open up a Jewish law book, it will say if a Jewish community is being built, a startup Jewish community, you have enough funding for one Jewish institution, synagogue, school, gym, swimming pool, whatever it is. No, mikvah first. Mikvah overrides it. You sell a Sefer Torah so you can build a mikvah. The mikvah is the most critical Jewish institution. Without it, Jewish family life comes to a crushing halt. Mikvah is the key element. I mean, there are stories of people, tremendous stories of the selflessness and the sacrifice people went through to create a mikvah. So the mikvah is a key to marriage. Many elements to it, but I want to focus on one as it relates to the theme of this evening. Generally, you could say there are two types of love. There's a love of a family love, brothers and sisters, parents and children, relatives. That's normally a stable love, a reliable love, a nurturing love, but it's not characterized as a passionate, fiery love. The relationship between a man and a woman, a husband and wife, who are not family, and do not come from the same background, and did not know each other usually most of their life, and are usually very, very different, we talk passionate, romantic, fiery love. Two kinds. One's a stable, more quiet, calm love, and then you have a romantic, passionate love between a husband and wife, a healthy love. Judaism, this is a psychological truth, but it's emphasized in one facet of mikvah. In order to maintain the passion and love and the newness and the freshness of a relationship, there needs to be physical separation and a space during the month where the husband and wife express their love in acts and sensitivity and caring and speech, but the sexual intimacy is put on hold for a segment of every month, and that builds the element in the passion that created the passion in the first place. Why is there passion between a man and woman different than children or siblings? Because the man and woman are very different, and there's an excitement and a newness and a freshness in the relationship, and it creates a certain passion. The question is, how could you preserve what a person feels in the beginning of a relationship, in the beginning of a romance, and keep that for decades to come? And Judaism says if you introduce into your life a godly, spiritual element of a certain time of the month where you do not express your love in an intimate sexual way, with physical contact, but you express it in different ways, and then that passion and intimacy, the way that nature is, will build, and you'll be able to preserve the deep feelings of love and passion as it was in the beginning. And by and large, if you look at family life for thousands of years, a key to Jewish family life till recently, till it became very influenced by living very often as the secular environment in which we live. But Jewish family life has been able to create love and romance and great feelings of selflessness and commitment and fidelity for thousands of years in every kind of condition. Many secular and non-Jewish writers write about the Jewish family. I'll give you for instance. I ran across this a few months ago. One of the greatest scientists and philosophers is Francis Bacon. He lived hundreds of years ago, but he caused revolution in terms of scientific method and all of that. He has a whole book discussing his ideal of a perfect society. And in it, he talks about all different things about how everything would be perfect. And then he says, okay, what's about family life? He wants to describe about how a family, so the only Jewish characters in the book are the husband and wife and a Jewish home. And he uses the Jewish home as a model. He's writing to non-Jews and in Europe. But when he wants to select family life and love and sensitivity between a man and a woman and nurturing children and all of that, he says, for this we're going to use the Jewish model. The mikvah is a profound driving force that enables the passion and love and commitment and a certain sense of godliness. It creates a space for a husband and wife to be who they are, to nurture their own selves. It teaches one how to express their feelings in other kinds of ways. It builds up passion and creates a newness in the relationship. So mikvah is called, it's a sacred act, but its psychological benefits in terms of romance, very powerful, cannot be overstated. And like I said before, if people want to know more details about the mikvah, there's details, how it's implemented and all of that. For the men or the women, the rabbis here or the rebbetins will be more than happy to, we don't have time to go into details, we'll be more than happy to share that and study the topic with you. So that's another concept, a key to sanctity of the Jewish home was tzimtzum, a certain love, acting lovingly always. The love should emanate from the godly soul, from a deeper selfless part of oneself. And the institution of mikvah in family life, these things together created something very beautiful that carried the Jews through history. And you have share a story. I'll wrap up with a story and we'll do some questions. But a story that brings some of this together. A story they tell of the Baal Shem Tov, the first Hasidic master. He had a student who wanted to see the prophet Elijah. There's a Jewish teaching in the Talmud that if a person is very spiritual, they could have a revelation. Gilui Eliyahu. They could merit to see the prophet Elijah. Elijah seems to move from heaven on earth. He visits us at the Passover Seder. He comes to circumcisions. He's a creature that still moves from heaven and earth. So he tells the Baal Shem Tov, look, I'm a scholar. He was very charitable, a kind person. What spiritual things do I need to do to merit to see the prophet? So Baal Shem Tov told him to take a hike, in Yiddish probably. He told him, year after year, this disciple was insistent. Tell me what spiritual things I'm prepared to do, whatever it takes. One year before Passover, the Baal Shem Tov tells him, you want to see Eliyahu, you want to see the prophet? I'm going to tell you what it is you need to do. Passover is coming. I want you to pack a wagon filled with boxes of gifts of food and clothing for a family. Many, many gifts. Travel to this town in Minsk. Somewhere in the outskirts there, they'll find a dilapidated home. There's a poor woman there, a very poor family. Arrive there before Passover. Spend Passover with them. Give them all the food and the gifts. He was a person with means. And you'll merit, God will bless you to see Elijah the prophet. He rushes home. He wants to get permission from his wife. He needs to get permission to leave for Passover. His wife says 100%, you've been making everybody crazy, Meshuggah, for years already about this obsession with Elijah. Get it over with already. Go, leave, I'll help you pack, whatever it is. Right? And he packs up, he has his boxes of food and all the provisions for Passover and gifts of all different types of garments and clothing. He travels to Minsk, the outskirts, he finds the home, he knocks on the door. Children are crying, a woman opens the door. He says, can I spend Passover with you? She says, look, we'd love to have a guest. I need to be honest. We don't have food sufficient for our Seder, for our family. We barely have clothes. Children aren't dressed properly. Nothing. So he says, it's your lucky day. I'm a wealthy man. My wagon is filled with wonderful things, I'd love to give them to you, and we'll have Seder together. Fine. They have a beautiful Seder. All the children are dressed beautifully. It's splendid. The cup of Elijah is filled. He's waiting. They're going to open the door. He's been waiting a decade for this. They open up the door. It's a no-show. No one's there. Okay, he's a bit upset. They close the door. They continue with the Seder. He's a bit disappointed, but he figures the Baal Shem Tov never said Elijah was going to walk through the door at that moment. Okay. They finish the Seder. He stays up the whole night. He thinks 2, 3, 4 in the morning, there'll be a knock on the door. Quietly, it will be secret. He stays up the entire night. It's morning, time for the morning service to go to shul. No Elijah. He prays. He's already getting grumpy. It's the second night Seder. He realized maybe it's going to be night 2, second Seder. The door opens for Elijah again. It's a no-show. He stays up the whole second night. He's exhausted. He's miserable. There's no Elijah. Stays up for 2 days, 2 nights. He's a miserable wreck. He's furious at his Rabbi. That's it. He rushes back to the Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov. He holds him. He doesn't express the outrage, but he says, I went. No Elijah. The Baal Shem Tov says, did you do what I say? He said, I did exactly what you said. What do you mean? Of course. Baal Shem Tov thinks. He says, okay. You got to switch it up a little bit. Go back for the last 2 days of Passover. Bring more gifts and more wonderful things. But change your technique. Don't knock on the door right before candle lighting and ask to go in. Wait, stand on the doorstep, wait for a few minutes, meditate. Then knock on the door. So he goes back home, he gets permission from his wife again. Can I go? Yeah, of course you can go. Go back, see Elijah. Fills up his wagon with goodies. He travels. Sun is setting. He's waiting at the doorstep. He hears crying. Children are crying, they're hungry. The mother calls them together, family meeting. He's listening. The mother says, my children, remember before the Seder, we had nothing. And I told you, have faith in God, and God will send the prophet Elijah. Not only did God answer our prayers, but the prophet stayed with us for 2 days. Have faith, my children, and God will send the prophet yet again. And the chassid of the Baal Shem Tov understood what the Baal Shem Tov was trying to teach him, and he knocked on the door. If you want to have messengers of redemption in your life, become that Elijah for somebody else. And who better than for your spouse, for your children? The best gift you can give your children is to love your spouse, to treat her with dignity, to create a space in your heart, a loving space, a tzimtzum, to act lovingly, to introduce elements that God gave us in the Torah that create sanctity in marriage, that had lifted the Jewish people across history, to create beautiful, sanctified homes that raise beautiful children and grandchildren who continue the path of Torah and its tradition in a happy way, in a romantic way, in a loving way, in a godly way. So, Shavua Tov. And maybe we'll take a question or two if there is.
You finished the first story with the rich Jewish family in Europe? You didn't finish that.
Why are you listening so well? So this guy's name was the Tzanzer. Good? So there was this student in yeshiva, his name was the Tzanzer. He became the famous Tzanzer later on, a big scholar, a brilliant scholar. But he had many afflictions and so forth. But he spent most of his day in the academy studying, so it wasn't like he was playing sports. It was overlooked, basically. There was a family who was very, very wealthy. They had a beautiful daughter. Her name was Fega. She was gorgeous and she was kind, but she was also, I think in Russian they would call it, there's some people here, a kratsavitsa or something like that. Yeah? Okay, you got it. She was something special. So in the olden days in the shtetl, how did they do business? You had a very prominent or wealthy family. They would try to say, look, a little bit, you great scholar, we're going to endow you, we're going to have a cheer, you're going to keep on studying and you'll be a great Jewish leader and you'll marry, we're going to take care of the financial element. That's how it was done. Actually, parenthetically, there's a book by a non-Jewish author. It's called The Mystique of the Jew. And in it, the author tries to figure out, why are the Jews so wise and intelligent? It's interesting. So he comes up with a theory. I don't know if it's true. It's just an interesting theory. He says the Jews did exactly what the opposite of the rest of Christian Europe. He said Christian Europe, the wisest and the smartest people, would rise in the church, and they would not marry, and they had no children. So essentially, for 1,000 years, it was the smartest and the most talented ended their genetic pool. He said the Jewish community, they did the exact opposite. The wisest and most talented married the wealthiest and most affluent families. So they had more children than the average family. They had the best doctors and medical care, and they were able to raise and nurture their children. So he said what the Jews did is the opposite of what everybody else did in Europe, and that's why they created a pool of all these bright people. I don't know if it's just an interesting idea. But in any ways, I didn't see it in the Talmud, I don't know if it's true. But in any event, back to this, so Fega's family heard, there's the Tzanzer, this is a scholar of the highest caliber. Let's just make a shidduch, let's go for this. They did business very quickly then. So the mother said, no. He's a great scholar, but you gotta at least see him once. She tells the husband, you gotta. Okay. The husband goes to the academy, sits down next to this young student, and discusses Jewish law. He's blown away. Brilliant scholar. Kind, humble. Whoa. He rushes back home, he comes in, Mazel Tov, the wedding, invitations, the whole thing. Sometime later, somebody approaches Fega's mother and says, by the way, he's a genius and kind, but the match is a bit odd because your daughter happens to be beautiful and whatever, and the very opposite, he has very many issues, and it doesn't seem like it's a bit odd. The mother never knew about this. She's like, whoa, she didn't hear. I guess there was no gossip on Facebook. She didn't know. So she tells her husband, we made a mistake here. This just that's not going to work. Anyways, they didn't know what to do. They already moving along. The wedding is approaching, or whatever it was. Word got back to the student at Tzanzer that there were issues that they did not know. He was under the impression they knew about all his challenges. He comes to the home. He knocks on the door. He says, Fega's father answers the door. Fega's father opens the door. He says, I understand that you did not have all the information about me. I have no grudge. I totally understand. And the marriage is off. That's fine. However, we're still engaged. We'll break the engagement in an hour, but let me go for an hour walk with Fega, one stroll. Okay. The father's very impressed with his forgiving nature, and so, okay, fine, makes sense. They go for a stroll. So this is how the story goes. The story they tell is, they're walking past the river, and for a moment, the Tzanzer tells Fega, look into the river. She looks into the river and she's horrified. Her whole beauty was gone, and she took on all his challenges. And then a moment later, everything went back to regular. So the Tzanzer said, I'm going to tell you what just happened. You just experienced a little bit of a deeper truth. So he starts to tell her a Talmud. In the Talmud it says that in heaven, God is busy making matches. 40 days before souls come down, the Talmud says, God is saying this soul will be, God's busy matchmaking. The Talmud has a whole discussion about this. What is the significance of it and so forth. It's called a marriage made in heaven. Others are made in the other place. Whatever. But the Talmud discusses the ones in heaven. So the Tzanzer says, when my soul was about to come down to earth, I asked God, show me the soul of my partner, of my better half. Let me see who she'll be and her personality. And God said, whoa, this is classified information. If we start opening up the files, everybody's going to want changes, adjustments, tweaks, personality changes. No business will get done. It's all classified. So the Tzanzer says, I told God, I'm special. I'm going to be a big Jewish scholar, and I'm not going to ask for any. Trust me. So God says, okay. Tzanzer says that I saw that I was going to be like this perfect person. Everything. I was going to be flawless on every level. Spiritually, physically, intellectually. I was going to be and the person I was going to marry was going to have many other challenges. And so I told God, you know what? Switch. I have a very gifted mind. Give me the physical challenges, and allow her to be perfect and beautiful in that way. So the Tzanzer says, God says, I told you you're going to start bargaining and making problems. He said, no, I meant for myself. This is Avat Yisrael. This is already love. This is... So they said, okay, fine, deal. In heaven they said deal. So the Tzanzer told Fego, what you just saw in the river was the way it was supposed to be. This is the story they tell. So she was very impressed and charmed by his... they ended up getting married and so forth. And this story is... The idea of the story is you could see a flaw in your spouse and you could be upset. It could get you angry. But when you start to think about soulmates and your destiny, not only should you make space in your heart for the totality of somebody else, even though it's flawed and not perfect, but you even should thank God for their flaws. Maybe they took yours. It's a romantic idea, but the idea is that there's a deep soul connection, and the husband and wife, in deeper sense, are really one. The souls are one. In heaven, the soul was one, and then it got divided, and then on earth, they joined together again. It's a spiritual teaching. It's one soul. It's not my problem, your problem. There's a oneness. So deep love comes from the soul, and when a person operates on the soul level, things change. So the animalistic soul is not necessarily evil, but it's like a nice dog. Anybody here has a puppy or something? I don't want to have to be sensitive about this. But a puppy or a dog is not bad. A dog can be very beautiful, very nice. But I come from California, so I have to be extra sensitive. You can have a dog for 20 years, you could be the best owner, and a thief comes into your home, and the thief has nice, extra good biscuits. 20 years of loyalty, gone. It's a fact. I know it's hard to hear, but it's a fact. It's not true, okay? Okay, so this is the other opinion in the Talmud. But it's not, the dog is not bad. It's acting on its instincts. A dog doesn't, for example, you have a barbecue, so sometimes you'll see the dog looking at the owner, looking at the back and forth. It looks like it's meditating a philosophy. Is the dog thinking, what is my destiny? Should I jump on? What is the right thing for me to do? To jump onto the table? Or what is the moral? Is the dog thinking, what is the moral thing for me to do? What's the mitzvah? The dog is thinking only one thing. If I jump on the table, will I be zapped with the newspaper? Yes or no? Could I get away with it? It's not evil. It's just a dog thinks on a zoological level. It's an animalistic. A dog thinks like a dog, and it's fine. But it's instinctive. A dog doesn't think, that's why you never see a dog go online to therapy. Right? The dog doesn't think, what if I was a cat? What if my mother was... Human beings have these problems. A dog is... it's healthy and fine, psychologically stable and good. That I'm just saying to make you happy, yeah? Okay. So dogs they have it all worked out, but they don't have the inner conflict. They don't have the moral... So part of us, we have an animalistic soul. It doesn't mean we wake up in the morning and say, how can I trip somebody today? But there's part of us that in every encounter says, what's in it for me? How do I gain? There's part of the human being that operates on a biological level. And that could lead to selfishness and unhealthy things. It could lead to that. The godly soul is the exact opposite of the animalistic soul. The godly soul in every encounter asks a different question. Not can I get away with it? Not what's in it for me. You know what it asks? What does God want? What's the loving thing to do? What's the mitzvah? What's the ultimate virtue? So in every encounter it says, how do I do what's right? So when love is based on the animalistic soul, in every encounter it's all about me. It needs to be about me. But the godly soul, when love comes from the godly soul, from the soul level, it's much deeper. And it's not about me. It's what can I do for my spouse? How do I do the right action to make them happy? It's not about me. So it's a much deeper love. That's loving the Leah and the Rachel element. Creating the space for the neshama to emerge. Maybe one more question? Yes. Well, I'll just do an order. Yeah. First, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to make a comment about the dog element, since I do have a dog. I mean, within a relationship with an animal, you have unconditional love. They love you no matter what. Unless you abuse them, they're not going to love you and stuff like that.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of another interesting element within human relationships, there's always conditions. You know, children, parents, partners and stuff. With an animal, it's unconditional love, which is the love we have with Hashem, right? Does Hashem put conditions on our love? Or do we put conditions on Hashem's love?
For love to be meaningful, it has to be conditional. Unconditional love is meaningless or bad. We don't really believe, we say it, but in a way we don't believe it. I'm not talking about animals, it's a separate, interesting discussion. In other words, at a certain point, if a person is really evil, even among spouses or children, at a certain point, what do you mean you still love them at a certain point? It could be very extreme. Do you want to be loved by somebody unconditionally? In other words, do you want somebody to love you even, I'm not talking about you. Would X want Y to love them even if you did horrible, heinous acts? No. There's an element of conditional love, but within a certain boundaries. In other words, because we're human beings and we're responsible for our actions, and we have faith in the people we love, so they need to live up to certain things. Now, it doesn't mean, when I'm over here, I'm not talking about conditional in a sense, I'm gaining from you or pleasure, but I'm talking about within certain moral constraints. If love is not conditional, then it ceases to be a virtue. So, I mean, I don't know if I made that clear enough, but I'm really talking about extreme cases where a person behaves immorally, and then love will become unhealthy. God forbid you have one, I'll give you an example to make it vivid. I mean, this happens in history. One child, God forbid, murders the rest of the family. Does the mother still love that child? I mean, is there no? So at a certain point, there needs to be, same with a spouse. One spouse abuses, so if you say I love you unconditionally, you know what it really means? You know what another way of saying it? It means that I expect nothing of you. If I expect nothing of you, then I'm not disappointed because I expected that you were going to be a Meshugana. Oh, you did something horrible? No problem. I love you because I never expected you were going to be a mensch. So that's the reverse of it. But it's applied. But normally when we say unconditional love, we mean in a healthy environment, that the parent loves the child even if the child misbehaves and makes mistakes. But there's a certain moment where that gets stretched. That's why we say in the prayers, Avinu Malkeinu. God is our Father, a loving parent, which in a way is unconditional. But then God is also Malkeinu, a king. A king demands obedience, jobs. In other words, you're going to become promoted if the treasury is full, if the economy works well, if the military, but if you do a lousy job, we don't. So often we think, why do we want Malkeinu, Avinu? It should just be Avinu, Avinu. Why Avinu, Malkeinu? Because we really want both. We want both. We don't only want Avinu. If you're a student at university, writes a thesis, if this thesis is garbage, they want the professor to say, this is terrible, redo it, half of it's not good. If you hand in junk and the professor says, oh, wonderful, I was expecting nothing of you, so this is good. No, I hope you would expect that I could do better. I want you to judge it or say no, critique it because you demand more, because you think highly of me. So God says, I don't only love you, I gave you a soul. I gave you freedom of will, unbelievable gifts. You could accomplish an enormous deal. You could change the world. You could do acts of selflessness, of kindness, of holiness. And because I gave you the greatest gift of all, free choice, and you could use it with all the talents I gave you, I know you're capable of deep greatness. So I love you, but I also demand great things of you. Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu. Anyone, only Malkeinu, not good, because that means it's only on our actions. Only Avinu, only father or motherly love, unconditional love also. Avinu Malkeinu. So it's a fine balance. In relationships, it's like that too. All within a healthy environment. I think there was a question back there. So someone had a...
Oh, actually, I think I'll just ask you afterwards.
Okay.
It was like kind of interrelated, but wasn't exactly.
That never stopped anybody before.
Okay, so I guess I'll ask it. So, I heard that you have a soul and a neshama. Is the soul just the English word for the neshama?
I was using it in that sense. I mean, in the spiritual works, there's all different levels and gradations, but I was using it just generally. Everybody's made in the divine image. everybody has a certain soul that emanates from God. So I was using it in the most broad sense of it.
So my question basically was if you actually like have both a soul and a neshama. Like I kind of heard that.
No, you're correct. Your point is correct. There are many different levels. There's neshama, there's soul, there's nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. They're all different levels, but I was referring to the general concept. Remains true that we have a biological force. The biological force is more natural. We share that with the animal kingdom. We're earthly. We're made of earth. We have biological instincts for survival and self-preservation. And then we have this transcendent godly image in us, which I was referring to the neshama, the soul. I wasn't getting into different levels and higher souls. But you are right, there are different gradations and levels of holiness and different kinds of souls. But generally, everybody has that. I'll conclude with a little tale. If there's no more question, I'll conclude with a little insight. There are 2 seas in Israel. There's the Kinneret, which is a beautiful body of water, fresh, teeming with life. And there is the Dead Sea. No life, bitter, salt. They're both fed by the same river, the Jordan. So the question that is asked is, if they're both fed by the same source, how is that one is fresh, teeming with life, and the other is the Dead Sea? Same source, completely 2 different results. What? So a mystic once answered, I don't know if this is exactly the geographical full answer, but it's a good mystical answer. The Kinneret receives water from one end and gives water out the other. Israel drinks from the Kinneret. Receives from one end, and the Dead Sea only receives water. It doesn't give out anywhere, it just receives. If you only receive, if you only take, if it's all about me, then you do not live. To live is to give. When we learn to give, we only give to others, we ourselves live in a deeper way. How do you say life in Judaism? L'chaim. Is l'chaim plural or singular? L'chaim. Plural. How do you say it in the singular? How do you say l'chaim? You don't say l'chaim. L'chaim is only me and somebody else. Soul. To live, our toast is l'chaim, to life. To life is to give. To live is to give. In relationships, to God, to each other. And as we give to others, we ourselves are lifted in the process. We live. So l'chaim.